Hey guys, this is AI Gaming 1776 and I have been reviewing the GTX 960 for a few months. And the GTX 960 is what is powering this game right here. This is BioShock Infinite, a well-known title, being played on a 144 Hz monitor. So that means the 72 frames per second that you see in the upper right hand corner actually means something. And the GTX 960 does very well. So I'm using the 2GB card, and in the upper left hand corner is EVGA Precision X because MSI Afterburner does not work with this game. And it says we are using 1.2 gigs of VRAM, and this is a 2GB VRAM card, so that kind of matters. The clock speed right now is 1443. And I don't overclock my cards. That's just what it's doing on its own. So, here we go. We move around. We just got 90 frames per second. And the thing is, the GTX 960 can do really, really well at a lot of games. Now, there are some games where it struggles, but that's usually because it runs out of VRAM. Even at 1080p, you can run out of VRAM. That is just a reality. A lot of people like to say, oh, well, you don't need... Okay, let me give you an example real quick. Let me pause. So, the GTX 980 Ti, very enticing graphics card. It's about $650, somewhere in that neighborhood. And it beats the Titan X in a lot of situations. But the problem is, it only has 6 gigabytes of VRAM. And even at 1080p, there are big games. Warner Brothers is really guilty of this with the whole using a whole lot of your VRAM. But there are big games that use a lot of VRAM even at 1080p. So the GTX 980 Ti is powerful enough that it could game at 4K or 1440p. Especially if you put it in SLI, it can do 4K pretty well, but then you start running into the issue that it only has 2 gigabytes of VRAM, 6 gigabytes of VRAM in the 980 Ti. So VRAM is an issue whether we want to admit it is or not. And why people don't want to admit that it's an issue, I have no idea, but people swear up and down that, oh, X amount of VRAM is good enough for X amount of resolution, and I strongly disagree with that because there are several outliers that happen to be some of the big games of the year that will prove you wrong. So that's an issue, but I can already see through, and I say this a lot when I record with a camcorder, but I can already see through the viewfinder that this looks really good because it does. First of all, in real life it looks really good, but through the viewfinder it looks amazing. Now, I am using a very nice Canon camcorder. It's a prosumer camcorder. It does 60 frames per second, 1080p, but even that does not capture what is happening on the screen, because on the screen we're getting from 70 to 90 FPS, and it looks good. And we're using a 2 gigabyte GTX 960 that I am not overclocking. So on its own, it's at 1443 megahertz right now. Now, here's the thing. This is a BenQ. I think it's an XL2430T, 144 hertz, 1080p monitor, and the clarity on it is beyond beautiful. I've used a bunch of different 1080p monitors in my life, and this is 1080p. But it is so much clearer than any 1080p monitor that I've ever used. I'm looking at the floor in particular. Let me turn the game down. I'm looking at the floor in particular because in BioShock Infinite, in this level that I've chosen, there are so many details to look at. So let's get this going. Let's get this going because I want to show you some more things. I have to get Elizabeth's attention. As you can see, this is beautiful. This is 1080p, but it looks better than any 1080p screen I've ever seen. Now, I have a very nice Samsung television for reference. Looks better than that. I have a Vizio television. Looks better than that. They're both 1080p. This looks better than my normal 1080p monitor, and it's just gorgeous. I mean, it is insane how good this monitor looks. It looks better at 1080p than it has any right to. And with the GTX 960 powering it, it looks better at 1080p than it has any right to. Like, this is seriously a strong monitor. Just so you guys know, I am going to order in the next, I'm not sure when, probably in about a week, I'm going to order an Acer Predator monitor. I don't know the model number off the top of my head, but it's the one that's supposed to be the holy grail of monitors, the most perfect monitor that there is, 1440p, 144 hertz refresh rate, G-Sync, and all of that. So I'm going to actually compare this BenQ 1080p monitor to that. And I'm going to do that for a lot of reasons. See, when I do gaming, I don't just do the high end or the low end or anything. I do all of it, like from the top to the bottom. So anyway, this is beautiful. The shadows are beautiful. The clarity in the screen, the detail that you can see, even in something like the floor, the colors, everything is just gorgeous on the screen. And we are doing between 70 and 90 frames per second, and that makes the difference. So I should address the fact that I'm using a camcorder. If you guys follow my channel on a normal basis, you guys know that when it comes to 1080p footage, especially for games, what I usually do is I will use, why can't I get there? I was wondering why that took so long. I normally use a game capture device, and I will show you the footage on the screen, like the real footage from a game capture device. The thing is this monitor at the higher refresh rate looks better than what my game capture can handle. Straight up. I use an Elgato 1080p 60 frames per second game capture, and it does a very good job. I have my channel just this year has grown exponentially, and this is the year that I started featuring footage shot with that Elgato. As a matter of fact, I probably have 500,000 page views of footage shot with that Elgato just from this year. And I started in January. Right now it's August. I have a pretty small channel, so the Elgato has served me well. Don't get me wrong. I have much love for it, but I am telling you that I've reached a point where I kind of have to use a camcorder now, because the Elgato cannot do this justice. Well, first of all, I'm using a DisplayPort cable, so the Elgato cannot use DisplayPort. So that's problem number one. It uses HDMI. And I have tried over and over and over again. Even this monitor will not do the 144 hertz refresh rate with HDMI, even if I cut the Elgato out of the equation. So that's one of the problems. When I use HDMI, and I'm using very expensive Monster cables, I know a lot of people might hate on Monster, but they look really good. Okay, they really do. I got them on sale. I didn't pay too much for them. I paid a lot, but I didn't pay too much for them. But they do look really good for HDMI. They're 27 gigabytes per second. Look at the glow here. Oh, by the way, the settings. I almost have the game maxed. Don't know if you're going to be able to see with the camcorder, unfortunately. I changed some things because of how I feel about the aesthetic. Okay? I could max the game. That's not an issue, even using a GTX 960. Texture, ultra, texture filtering, ultra, dynamic shadows, very high. Post-processing, alternate, which we all know is the X11 only. Light shafts on. Ambient occlusion is probably the thing that I turn down the most. And the problem is the light is very blinding in this game in a very unappealing manner when ambient occlusion is higher. So that's on high. Object level of detail, ultra. So basically, I turn one thing on high and I turn one thing on very high. But other than that, the game's pretty much maxed out. And I chose that for aesthetic reasons. So we're at 105 frames per second right now. with an Elgato, not an Elgato, but at 1080p with a GTX 960. And it looks really, really good. Look at how good that wallpaper looks. Look at how well that pops. Look at Elizabeth saunter into the room. And look at the lighting. I mean, it is just incredible. And this is only 1080p. I'm going to tell you right now, I have been looking at 1080p content since 2007. It is currently 2015. That's 8 years. So if anybody was going to be done with 1080p by now, it would be me. I thought for sure I was done with 1080p. I was going to skip 1440, by the way. I was going to go to 4K. I kid you not. I was going to go straight to 4K. I was going to skip 1440 for PC gaming. I was going to go to 4K. And I was going to build a big computer to do it. At least a 6-core processor. At least 2 980 Ti's and SLI at least. I was actually thinking about Titans because of the VRAM issue that I talked about earlier. So I was going to go straight to 4K. All right. 1080p is played out. I'm done with 1080p. I'm ready to, move on from here. But then I got this monitor. Maybe I should explain that for 2 seconds, and I promise I'll be fast. I wanted to start testing out 4K monitors, but everybody keeps saying that the 1440p Acer Predator monitor, they say that's the best one. And I can understand why. It has a high frame rate and so on. 4K, it's kind of hard to push that. Even with 2 Titan X's, it's hard to push 4K at high frame rates. So I get that. But I was actually considering going to 4K. Okay, especially with Windows 10 coming out, because Windows 7, I'm using Windows 7 now, and Windows 8.1, both of those are known for having scaling issues with 4K, but I figured Windows 10 would handle that, no problem. It's what we're going to do going forward. So, sorry about that. I thought for sure I was going to go with Windows 10 and 4K and 4K monitor and SLI and all that jazz. So this part right here takes way too long. This is one of my benchmarking levels for a lot of reasons. There's indoor parts of this, there's outdoor parts of this. The Battleship Bay, there's a lot of beauty to be seen. This is very good when you want to test a graphics card or you want to test a monitor. Battleship Bay is a good one to go with. But that guy talking, that part takes a little too long. Anyway, look at the smoothness. Now I'm playing again with all of the action going on the screen. It goes down to maybe, look at that lighting. Even through the camcorder, I can tell that looks good. So it goes down to about 70 frames per second. But it also goes up to 105 in some parts with the GTX 960. So, by the way, this video here, the purpose that it serves. Oh, yeah, I'm actually playing the game through the viewfinder of the camera. That's not ideal. Let me play the game actually looking at the screen. That makes it easier. Makes it much easier. Look at that. See, I'm not too bad at video games. I'm all right. So, let's knock these guys out. Okay. Now I'm looking at oh, wait a minute. There's another guy. All right, let me look at the viewfinder again. When I look at the viewfinder, I have a better idea of what you guys see. All right, so the purpose of this video is I've been reviewing the GTX 960 because it is a super capable graphics card that I feel has been slept on. I feel like this graphics card, here's what happens. A lot of people worship at the church of frame rates. And if you look at frame rates only, the GTX 960 is not that impressive on paper. And there are people who do objective videos. They compare this to other graphics cards, and they do the whole, you know what people do, the whole frames per second, per dollar, all that kind of business. They do all that and they try to figure it out. And the GTX 960 is okay. It's like a poor people's graphics card. It's not considered to be amazing. But here's the thing. I use a GTX 970 Super Clock as my normal card. And that card is more than capable of 1080p gaming. You can pretty much max any game in 1080p minus anti-aliasing with the GTX 970. And even with anti-aliasing, you can still, and I'm talking like MSAA, you can still do pretty damn well with the GTX 970. So the 970 is a very capable card, and it will crush this 960 in frame rate. Okay, see how we're at 80, we're at 85 frames per second right now. At this exact same point, with the graphics turned up even higher if I want them to be, my 970 would be at the full 144 frames that the monitor can handle. So I am not going to try to make things up. The GTX 960 is not a Superman graphics card, but it's very capable. So when I say what's the point of this video, the point of this video is I do want to sing the praises of the GTX 960, but furthermore, I want to tell you this. I have all kinds of reviews coming up on this channel. Okay, and here's the thing. A lot of people get a graphics card sent to them or a monitor sent to them by some company for free, and they give you a review within a couple days or a week or whatever. I use the products long term before I make a review. I've had my GTX 960 since May, and it's currently August. And I have struggled with how I feel about the GTX 960, because on one hand I would love to recommend it, but on the other hand, there's a ton of games that 2 gigabyte VRAM limitation affect. Okay, it's just the truth, whether anyone wants to admit it or not. Dragon Age Inquisition pegs the VRAM 100%, uses all of it. Grand Theft Auto 5 uses all of the VRAM. Shadow of Mordor uses all of the VRAM. Watch Dogs uses all of the VRAM, I think. You'll have to double check that one. But a large handful of games use all 2 gigabytes of the VRAM. Okay? And that makes me feel like the card is not super future-proof. See, I know a guy is going to come when I'm in this room. That's what I was doing just now. I've been waiting on this guy to come. He usually comes. And I was looking for this room, and he didn't. Maybe I killed him. Alright then. Anyway, look how beautiful. Even though I turned ambient occlusion down, you can tell that the lighting is still beautiful here. So the GTX 960, heck, I think I've even read that it can play League of Legends in 4K. I don't play that game, so I don't know, but I think I've read that it can. And it is killing BioShock Infinite right now. And you know what other game it is really good at? Far Cry 4 and Far Cry 3. I kid you not. It is great at both of those games. Not so good at Dragon Age Inquisition. Not so good at Battlefield 4 or Battlefield Hardline. You know, there's a pattern here. It's not so good at a lot of the Ubisoft games, like the Assassin's Creed games. It's not so good with a lot of the EA games, and it's not so good at a lot of the Warner Brother games. As a matter of fact, Batman Arkham Knight, I still have that on my computer. Batman Arkham Knight requires 3 gigabytes of VRAM just to get past low textures. Yeah. So, Arkham Knight with this card, low textures. Right now we're looking at 72 frames per second. Again, this is a 144 hertz monitor. And it looks beautiful. It looks beyond beautiful. This monitor makes me feel like 1080p still has some life left in it. And that made me inspired to try out the Acer Predator, which I'm going to try probably in the next week or two. So, by the way, I'm also going to be looking at a 4 GB version of the GTX 960, so I can see if those games that are maxing out the VRAM, if they play better, if there's less stutter, if they play better with that 4 GB. And even then, see, the 4 GB version, and NVIDIA did this, okay? This is NVIDIA's fault. The 4 GB version of the GTX 960 in some cases costs enough money that it starts making you ask, should you get an AMD card or should you even get a GTX 970? And I think NVIDIA did that because the 960 as it stands, this is a 2 GB 960, as it stands is pretty strong. It's not quite strong enough to just wreck every game at 1080p 60 frames per second. See, the thing is, Far Cry 3 actually plays with the settings I choose, and they're pretty high settings, but Far Cry 3 plays at about 45 frames per second with this card, but it's that 45 frames per second looks great on this monitor. Don't get me wrong, it looks as good as 60 frames per second on many other monitors. So this card is not perfect, and we're at 88 frames, 89 frames, 88, we're at 80, it's going back and forth. 88 frames per second right now. Every time I look through the viewfinder it says 89, I promise, and then I look at the monitor it says 88. It's going back and forth. So anyway, Far Cry 3 with the settings I choose is like 45. Now, Far Cry 4, spoiler alert, this 2 GB card with very, very nice settings that I've chosen and a very beautiful and very smooth picture that I've chosen.